They didn't even know what it was. They didn't even recognize it as an illness. I've been through a lot of things. I've seen through a lot of doctors. There's a lot of costs associated with going, not having a program in place. Which
We're trying to make that point too.
Right, exactly. I'll be there for you if you need help. I also have a business degree. Several points come to mind. There's a million things, but one of them is you said, we need research dollars, we need money, etc. You also mentioned something, there was a mention of AIDS and SARS, and it seems to me that when somebody dies, millions of people die from this illness. All of a sudden, the ears perk up and everyone says this is an emergency. When we have this illness, where we disappear from society, where we lose on so many fronts, we get ignored because we don't show up. The people who get interested are people who are ill. We try to make it work, but we're not able to keep it on a sustainable basis. We do need the help of organizations such as yours to be able to help us make this a consistent, moving forward kind of thing. We have these clinics which exist, which are superb and help us, but again, they touch the surface because they diagnose us, they tell us all the things we're supposed to do, and then they send us off. But then we're on our own because our GPs don't know what we're doing. My doctor rolls his eyes when I come in. He actually doesn't want to see me anymore because he just doesn't know what to do. He says to me, you know more about this than I do. I have no idea what to do with it. So this is a bit of a frustrating experience. The other thing is, we talk about research dollars. Well, one of the ways that I think the government could help would be to develop information campaigns. I mean, a lot of diseases have gotten out there. The world starts knowing about them, how important they are, but they are not. This is not a psychological illness. That there is something that they can do. Money will come forth if people get motivated and they feel the heartstrings get tugged, and all of a sudden they realize that, hey, where do we donate for this? And money starts coming in. Then all of a sudden we can do something because we have money. We seem to be caught in a catch-22. We need money, we need energy, we need resources, we need doctors who know, and yet there's no place where we can see a way through. And I think those some of the things I'm mentioning, and I think through the work that you're doing, something could happen that would really make it worthwhile. I think also to centralize is important because we've got a specialization there and a think tank and that kind of thing, but it's got to disseminate. It's like I'll tell a friend and I'll tell a friend and somebody else tells a friend and it spreads. GPs don't know. I have a niece who just graduated. She's finishing her residency. She had an hour ME. This is the new person going in. Now, if you teach the new people, the new doctors what to do, they can actually go and teach the older doctors who are in practice, and they will start listening to them and make something happen. So there's a snowball effect. I think things can happen, but if I know that you're probably hearing the frustration in my voice, but 35 years, I have been a nurse, I have been a teacher, I have run a hospital, I've done coaching and consulting. Through this illness, I am pushing as hard as I can, and it is affecting my illness, but I truly would appreciate support from government in many of these approaches. I guess that's about all I'm trying to say. That's all I'm saying. Thanks.
Well, no, thank you. And I mean, your analogy of snowballing, we are looking at how we can build something that is going to be big enough that it will really do the job. And I mean, the thing I think I heard in common with the previous commenter was, how do we share, what works from, some physicians who are having success, how do we share that back to like your GP? So I get the need for a specialty clinic, research centers, but how do we manage to provide more support on the front line so that, your GP who's, at the end of her or his wits as well, just as you are after 35 years, how can they be better supported so that they can do more out there around the problems and closer to home so people won't have to travel as far, recognizing that there will always be a need to go to larger centers for more specialized care. That's the nature of our system. And how do we come up with something that really does work and best meets all of those needs? So thank you. And Dean got that as well, didn't he? Thank you.
My name is Diane Jing, and I'm a patient and president of the NE Association of Edmonton, Alberta. And forgive me if you've already covered this previously. My question and comment is regarding the case definitions and your proposal to, again, rewrite another one for Ontario. Particularly when in your evaluation in here, you said the Canadian consensus one was out of date. It was recently as 2016. You scored both that one low as well as the one that Alberta had gone and done one on its own. You scored that low. But yet the highest scoring one was from Alberta, from Australia. The concern we have is that there's so many case definitions as there is for right now. If there's not one for all of Canada, at the very minimum, we're just going to muddy the waters all the more. We have a difficult time right now as a society. We are working with U of A to go in and educate the different faculties, not just the medical students, but the dentistry and the kinesiology and all that stuff. So to have something to give to them so that it's at least clear, you know, what the symptoms are, what to look for, and something. So, you know, just to at least give them an awareness and, you know, some of the basics around it. You know, once they go online and they get bombarded with all of this stuff, you know, and then you know, if you've got every province starting to do their own thing, it's just going to get worse. You know, because again, you know, till we get everything up and running the way we would love to have it, you know, with all these wonderful centers across each province, it's still going to land on the individual societies, such as ours, to push the education from the bottom up. You know, right now it's like a lot of our patients say, you know, it's us going and educating our personal physicians. It's us going into the institutions and educating the doctors in training, that sort of thing. So again, we need to have something very clear, and doing, you know, a completely different one just for Ontario is, I think we're just setting time back another 50 years again.
No, thank you. And I would be incredibly shocked, surprised, if the expert group we put together came up with a unique Ontario definition. In practice, what we will end up with, and I haven't seen their recommendation yet, but my expectation is that it will be up to date because they're using all of the available definitions and research findings and clinical findings, and I suspect it will just be what in 2018 is put forward for Ontario, and I don't think it will be that different from some of the previous definitions. I mean, there's nothing I'd like better than, you know, to have an updated Canadian definition, but the reality is I don't see anyone able to really provide that in a timely manner, so that the task force I chair has got an up-to-date clinical definition. Again, we're looking for a clinical definition to guide care more than a research definition, which we recognize may be set by different research bodies from time to time, but you know, I don't want to see the balkanization that you're worried about either. And I think
that's what I would like is the clinical one, because at least if that's something we can put towards, like, whether it's the Canadian Medical Association or each of our provincial physician associations, and get it coming from the top down.
Yeah, that would be great if there was interest in those quarters in taking that on, but I mean, the reality is we've got a task force now. We are only one province, but almost 40% of Canadians live in Ontario and get their health care services in Ontario. So we, I guess in terms of, is there anything a province can do, we thought we would step up and try and provide the suggestion of what might be a 2018 clinical definition. More than happy if people elsewhere decide it's actually pretty good. have tried to go to outside experts who care for patients with these conditions and then come up with a consensus definition there. So stay tuned. It will be revealed. I don't know it yet myself, and I don't think it'll be so chaotic that it totally disrupts all the really good work that's been done to date, and we're just looking for up-to-date, evolved, enhanced, and the best possible. If someone else comes along with something better in the future, I'd be the first one to say, go with the best, and I don't think the best is likely to change that much, but I don't know yet. Thank you.
Dr. Copes, this will be our last question or feedback to you. I know everyone would like to speak, but...
Well, I do have the compendium of input,
Oh,
so thank you very
that's
much.
in our closing for sure. Yep, absolutely.
My name is Alison Ray. I'm the board chair and CEO of Action City. And I just wanted to add a couple of comments to comments already made. We talked about meeting the biological references, and you asked the question, what treatments are out there that we're not getting? And there's two that immediately come to my mind, and one is a proper test for Lyme. It's estimated 30% of people with NE really in fact have Lyme, but they can't get a decent test for it. Although my dog can go to the vet and get a decent test for it, which is kind of sad. And the other treatment is long-term antibiotics. I had the luxury of doing that, and I had an incredible recovery until they pulled the drugs, and I sank right back down again. So there is methods out there that we could be using that we're not. I want to echo the need to bring clinicians into research, but we also need to bring patients into research as well.
Great, thank you, and those have been noted. Very important.
Well, I don't think I'm saying anything that wasn't obvious. There's a lot of passion, Dr. Copes. There's so much appreciation for what you and the task force have done. Some of the things I just want to say in closing. There was another member from the task force here, correct? We all want to make a contribution before we die. Some of us do it through our kids, some of us do it through our work, whatever. But really the task force that you're on, I think has so much importance to all of Canada. That's why there are people here across the country that have paid themselves to come here out of their own pockets because they see the opportunity to leverage. It's really just, we can't stress enough how important it is. When I put out the request through Margaret Parler to her network, Coast to Coast, saying, wow, we've got this fantastic task force and there's a report, please read it. So we sent it to them. You know, what feedback can you give? Did they miss anything? Can you embellish anything? Can you give additional suggestions? Well, what came back in a matter of, what, under 3 weeks, Margaret? Coast to Coast, 24 individuals, and they're still coming, so there's about 3 or 4 that are in here right now, gave that much thought and commentary. So many of you are in this room, thank you for doing it. We're really happy to give you these reports. I know you're dying to get your fingers on, so you've got the color pictures that haven't been there. Sadly, you've got the black and white, but you're getting the electronic copy, so you'll get the color there. Anyone who inputs the report is going to get the electronic copy. If you didn't input the report and you would like to get the electronic copy, could you give your email address to Margaret Parler in the pink jacket, and she'll make sure that you get a copy of it as well, because this is what Coast to Coast you guys are saying. So I guess, and I'm going to read this for reasons that will become obvious in a second, you know, really in closing the session, on behalf of myself, everyone here, want to thank you, want to thank your task force, your frankness, your genuineness, your commitment. To the audience input today and the audience input there, really, really thank you. But I'd like to leave you with the words of a patient who And this patient is the daughter of someone in the audience today. Her name is Charlotte Daw. She was stricken with the disease 6 years ago while completing her master's at the University of Victoria. She's a really talented, bright young woman, 27 years of age. So many of you said, you know, I've had it for 30 years, 15 years, whatever. Many of you start at a young age like this young lady. So she has asked that I give you this message on behalf of herself, but every patient in Canada. I can't think of anything clever to say. My brain is constantly mush. My bones ache all the time. I just want to sleep, but I can't get restorative sleep. I'm going to have to give up everything. I wish doctors were better educated about the diseases. I wish we patients got the recognition we deserve and the funding to find a cure. I really, really want to live again. Thank you. So I think that sort of says it all. We know you're working towards that. We know you're working towards that, but these young kids, they need a shot. The older people need a shot. So please just reach out to us. We're all here to give you the input and to help you make the right decisions.
Great. Well, thank you again very much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure to be able to share what I can about the work of the task force. And more importantly, thank you very much for the input and the comments and questions you've given here this afternoon that have been noted down, and also for the input here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
And,
Really.
and this is more than I expected.
Anyway, want to go through these sessions because I think there's the kind of issues in each. And I want to see how much consensus there is, because as Diane brought up from Alberta, it would be very nice if we had agreement all the way across the country. We could talk about all the way across the world, but we'll just start with the country. Okay, so first, diagnosing ME/CFS. And there have been developments in the last year or so. The Oxford definition, I guess it was a couple of years ago, the Oxford definition was retired. And then within the last year or so, last fall I think it was, the PACUDA definition is gone from the CDC website. So that essentially leaves the CCC principles as the standard definition for diagnosis. I don't know if there's any debate around it. I'm going to say the CCC has a family of products, and it's a family of products we need to talk about. The CCC, of course, was published back in 2003. It describes the illness. When it comes to the treatment, we can get into the primers, which build on the CCC. But then a few years back, the United States government hired the IOM to come up with diagnostic protocols. There were about 50 top experts around the world saying, why are you wasting your time doing this? We already have the CCC that worked. And they went ahead and came up with the IOM report. And I looked at that IOM report and I said, it's really confusing. And how does it fit into the puzzle? And it took me a long time to figure out, but I would say it fits in the puzzle this way. The IOM report has a set of criteria which is for the family doctor who has a stream of patients going through the office to try and pick out which are candidates for ME. Then, when it comes to actually figuring if they are ME, they can go to the CCC and work through the process. So, does everybody understand that? Is there any comment on that particular aspect? Okay, if you're going to talk about the IOM report, I just did a very interesting experiment. In the last newsletter, I sent out a question. How would you describe yourself before you were diagnosed? And if the CCC wording were in place, would you have been identified? So that is, to me, a test of how good the the IOM is in picking the people out. And what I found I have got, a dozen answers in, they're very interesting. What I have found out is that this is the basis for further study. But some people said, absolutely yes, that would have helped me be diagnosed. And some said, no, that wouldn't have found me. That isn't the way I was describing my illness. That isn't the way things were described. So my conclusion is the IOM did come up with a very interesting concept. It has a lot of potential, but I think that there is room for CIHR to do studies to find out if it indeed works, if it can be refined, improved on, if there are other tools in place that can help. Okay, are we okay with this slide? Oops, just a second. Diagnosing FM. Okay, what we know there is that in 1990, the American College of Rheumatology came out with a definition based on widespread pain and tender points. We know that in 2003, the Canadian Consensus Panel adopted the 1990 definition, but pointed to additional signs and symptoms. And then we know in 2010, another panel came out with an alternate ACR definition where they built in the widespread pain, activity reduction, cognitive problems, sleep problems, and other things. We know that they have updated or tweaked that definition in 2011 and tweaked it again in 2016. So, which do we use, the 1990 or the 2010? What we know is the U.S. Social Security Administration uses both. We do know that the 2012 Canadian fibromyalgia guidelines put out by another panel recommended going with the 2010 definition. And that the 2010 definition does not use tender points. Then we get the survey of rheumatologists that happened last year or so. And what they said is they still like doing tender points. So we know that there isn't complete buy-in to the 2000 definition. We know that the 1990, we know that it's someplace partway in between, and the CCC is really the bridging mechanism. So we know that there is work that needs to be done in this field to sort things out, but what do we do in the interim? Because we could spend years going down a rabbit hole trying to figure it out. So I would suggest that the U.S. Social Security solution of sort of using a blend of the two for the time being might be the way to go. Any comments on that aspect? Yes, Rick?
So I presented to the rheumatologist in Vancouver, and it was telecast to all the rheumatologists in the province about 2 weeks ago. And it was interesting because one of the rheumatologists, his comment was that FM is not a rheumatologic condition and shouldn't be part of what they treat. And about half of the rheumatologists in the room agreed with that.
I heard that as well.
Yeah.
I heard that they're getting they're starting to push back on it.
Well, if you look at that survey of rheumatologists that was published fairly recently, they really do want out of the field. Yeah, so we've got a very, very serious problem there. Sorry, before I leave the slide, let me also add that the other question I asked on the questionnaire I sent out was, could we use something similar to the IOM criteria to identify fibromyalgia? So the IOM criteria say, ask about fatigue, da-da-da-da-da-da, and if we ask about pain, da-da-da-da-da. And again, I think that what my little study shows is we need a bigger study, but I would suggest that there are a lot of people who were talking about pain and have a diagnosis of ME, and that really the IOM criteria could be expanded to pick up ME and FM, and then sort that out later. Does that make sense?
No.
No. No, okay, okay, Gloria.
For people, like I've been diagnosed with both.
Okay, should I hand this microphone
I'll
up?
use my megaphone, my big voice.
Margaret, push the button down and hold it for about 5 seconds until the green light comes on.
Select button?
Is the green light on when you hold that button? Okay.
Hi, I'm Gloria. I strongly believe that fibromyalgia and myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue, these are all separate diagnoses. Fibromyalgia is something I was diagnosed with first, and I clearly can understand, because it happened this way to me, I can clearly understand that fibromyalgia is a separate diagnosis, and that in terms of getting patient care, like proper patient care, and getting proper research, that we need to keep them separate. And we need to sort of clarify what ME is, and I think that's really going to push us forward. And instead of clumping us into this ME, FM, CFS, or this thing.
Okay, any other reactions to that?
Well, I guess it depends on what the purpose of the exercise is. I mean, if we're looking at a diagnostic criteria, we definitely have to separate them out. I mean, a lot of people with ME have other issues like thyroid condition, other autoimmune diseases. I mean, we're not going to lump them together as well. It's good to do testing so that you can see if there's a comorbid condition or if there are other several kinds of symptoms that they may have that are clearer in one patient than in another. But I think for the purposes of the diagnostic code, that's if I'm understanding you correctly. Are you suggesting that the IOM report should be extended to include both ME and FM as part of its diagnosing? Is that what you're saying, Margaret?
I am saying that the wording in the IOM report, you know, it's the sort of the thinking process doctors go through when they're assessing patients. The same kind of wording could be used to pick out FM patients.
So there could be a separate report that's for FM. Is that what you're saying? Not the same diagnostic criteria. So that you come out as a patient, well, you might have ME, you might have FM. You've got one of them.
Well, don't forget the IOM report is only the entry point into being, you know, fully assessed.
Right.
Yeah. So the question is the gate coming in. And some people come in through the FM gate and some people come in through the ME gate. So if you are identified as you're in this ballpark, then the sorting can take place from there.
So just to be clear, you're suggesting the gate should be widened to include ME and FM patients together, so when a doctor is diagnosing, he's not going to know whether it's ME or FM?
A screening tool.
The screening tool is going to screen for, and so number one, you're saying that the IOM report, so the C criteria is simply for screening. And number two, that it should be widened so that it doesn't just screen for ME, it should screen for ME and FM.
I don't have the answer, but I think it is something that is worth considering.
Right, well that I would disagree with. I mean, clearly the more we know about an individual's disease, the better. I mean, as it is, we're probably lumping too many people together calling it ME. So to extend it even further doesn't seem to make sense to me personally. Anyway, that's my 25 cents worth.
At this point, we don't know very much about ME and FM. A lot of people, as you said, I'm one of those people that had the 3 diagnoses, you know, where do they begin, where do they end? I would say perhaps that came first, ME second, MCS sort of somewhere in between or at the end. I think we would get, if we could differentiate them, we might be able to then say this, either that they're separate and hence need their own approach to care and to diagnosis, or they're an evolution or a part of, but I think by separating them, we have a better chance. We have kind of two ways of getting at perhaps at solutions, either for them separately or for them as one. Whereas if we lump them together, we might end up doing what they did in the past, lumping everybody together and then ending up something that doesn't really hold in the long term. So what I think if we can differentiate them, doesn't mean that they should be treated by different doctors or different ways, but if it's possible. Anyway, yes, somebody asked a question for me.
Actually, I think there's one over in your next.
My question is to the doctor, because they're lumping all three together under central sensitization syndrome, and I just found out about this, and when I contacted the Winnipeg fibromyalgia group, the leaders there hadn't even heard about it, and then you start going to some of the articles, it seems as if the pushback from the doctors are to lump all three of us together, the multiple chemical sensitivities as well. And anyway, so I do want to hear from the doctor, like, there is going to be somebody speaking tomorrow or today maybe, on central sensitization syndrome. Can you speak to that? Because we really don't want to be lumped together. I totally want to be separate. We broke away from the fibromyalgia ladies, and they're wonderful, but they do Zumba and they do Tai Chi, so we broke off. But it finally got some press when Lady Gaga had FM. All of a sudden, Winnipeg media started calling them. 25 years these ladies have never got cut by the media. Finally, Lady Gaga did it for them.
Margaret, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're talking about the difference between a diagnostic tool and a screening tool. Because I think we have to remember that there's three types of tools. There's screening tools, diagnostic tools, and research tools. And the definitions may vary, because the reality is that these conditions also exist along a spectrum. And if you use the criteria rigidly, you're going to leave out a bunch of people who have early or mild versions of these conditions. So that's the first thing. But a screening tool is used by doctors to rule out. So it means, and I agree with you, I think if you don't have widespread pain, sleep disturbance, and fatigue, you probably don't have chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia. And so that's the way that a screening tool is used, is to make sure you don't have something. So that's the first hurdle. Once you get the screening tool, it doesn't mean that you use that to make the diagnosis. It just means you've made your pool smaller and identified a group that needs more attention to apply the other tools. And the other tools include the specific definitions around ME, FM, and ES. The other part about the use of central sensitivity syndromes, I don't think this again comes to the difference between clinical care and research. They should be researched together as a lump, but as a clinician caring for patients and trying to look at all of the aspects, if you're not taking care of the IBS and if you're not taking care of the interstitial cystitis or different aspects, because the patients who come to me, fatigue and pain, that's ME or FM. Doctors tend to pick one or the other. So you have a doctor pick everybody is ME for them, and another doctor, everybody is FM for them. So I would say that when they come to see me, it's between 50 and 70% of the patients that have both. It's not surprising, because like I presented this morning, the criteria for FM are actually embedded in the Canadian definition for chronic fatigue syndrome. So the use of central sensitization is to expand the view of the doctors to look at the big picture. It is not meant to homogenize the population in terms of research or treatment. In fact, it's there to expand the treatment options so that we look at the patient as a big picture.
Margaret, I'm going to let you
Go through the rest?
manage things, so
Okay.
you want to move forward, and then we'll come back to questions.
Okay, well, I would say that this has really brought to the surface one of the issues that, we need to deal with. The IOM, as I am proposing as a initial screening tool, identifying who is in the pot, and then what you deal with it in there. And then we also do have to sort out what is ME, what is FM, and we are not all the way there yet. Now, treating ME, FM, and what we're going to expect from the panel that comes out of Ontario, which we hope is across the rest of Canada. We know that CBT and GET are gone from the CDC website, so that is a big progress. We know that the IACF-SME primer is up there on how to treat adults, and we know that the pediatric primer is up there. And we also know, by the way, that both those documents are now available in French for the rest of Canada. So these are, telling you what to do. They are not clinical practice guidelines in the strict sense. And the United States in particular has a definition of clinical practice guidelines. It is something developed through a particular process, especially being evidence-based. And one of the big issues that we run into in MEFM is the issue of evidence base. The evidence base for ME is not there. First of all, we have all sorts of studies that are under the Oxford definition, the Fukuda definition, and everything else. So you have to sort out the evidence base. Second of all, there has been a shortage of research funding. So there's so much research that has not been done. So this is an area where one has to proceed on a basis other than the evidence. Or, there is, I don't mean there's no evidence there, but a selective use of the evidence. And, we're coming out and saying that those are two very good documents that you can hang your hats on. They will evolve over time as more is learned. Now you come to FM, and we have the 2012 Canadian Guidelines for FM, which were done in a clinical guidelines process and made it onto the Canadian Medical Association website and so on. But what we know about them is they are not respectful of the full seriousness of the illness. They recommend graded exercise therapy without checking for post-exertional malaise. They do not test. You've met most of the criteria of ME, but they don't ask that final question, do you have post-exertional malaise? Therefore, you use the guidelines, which say exercise. As far as I'm concerned, these guidelines are putting patients across Canada at risk. Okay. They arbitrarily assign responsibility to family doctors, which is getting to the point that was brought up. Rheumatologists want out. And so what did the rheumatologists do? They wrote guidelines writing themselves out of the equation. That is not fair. And we're going to be later on today discussing, what is the role of specialists and all these things. Rheumatology doesn't want to be a specialty, so maybe we have to invent our own specialty on this. The 2012 guidelines have a psychosocial flavor to them, and they claim to be evidence-based, but most recommendations are based on opinion. But if you do most of the scoring schemes that are used to check guidelines, those guidelines serve well, whereas the IACF-SME primer doesn't even count and isn't even scored. So what we're saying is we need a sophisticated way of judging which guidelines to use and which not to use. And it goes, it's just like judging good literature, do you do it on how long your sentences are and stuff like that, which is basically the agreed method and other methods, or do you do it on what is the impact on patients? And I think patients do have a strong say in whether they work or not. Anyway, I'm rambling, but any comments on what I've said on this section? A lot. Whoa, okay. These are not easy areas, and I can see why the Ontario Task Force ran into troubles.
The guidelines of the
are using would be those 2012 ones by the rheumatologists. Definitely do not recognize post-exertional malaise or any type of it whatsoever. We definitely are pushing exercise, pushing walking. Just, 6 minutes is not a big deal. Getting out of the house, getting dressed ahead of time doesn't matter. Whatever the weather is doesn't matter. They do not consider even orthostatic intolerance or POTS. They didn't even know what it meant.
It is one of my theories that if we went in to look at the patient population with a diagnosis of fibro, we would find a number of people with ME, that are undiagnosed ME.
Definitely. Certainly in Montreal and Quebec, and I'm sure a lot of other places, because it's not listed as any of the criteria, and the doctors aren't familiar with it at all. And we've seen it ourselves with.
Yeah, and this is another area for research. Okay,
I
next.
can't hear the comments. Just can you, when you're speaking, can you speak into the microphone and just hear the comments?
She was telling us that in Montreal and Quebec, they were, the fibro criteria, they're pushing people to exercise no matter what, causing this problem.
I think I would support that because fibromyalgia, a lot of the doctors, once the GPs who treat you, once they hear ME, a lot of them don't differentiate ME, FM, whatever. And their concept is you must be depressed or have some depression or whatever. Therefore, you should exercise, keep active, and how much have you done last week? How much have you won? Are you running? Are you doing any sports? Like, it's a bit insane. It doesn't really work for people like us. But that is still happening in the medical course. So that goes back to my concept before. Maybe we should separate them so that we're not lumping everybody in terms of what we're telling them to do as well.
Okay, if we are going to separate ME and FM, then the FM people need the ME diagnosis if they have it.
Yes, absolutely. That's right.
Yeah.
I think you made one of the key points that I was trying to make to the rheumatologist, which is asking the question of post-exertional malaise. Because in the room, when I presented a couple of weeks ago, none of them had ever heard of that question or thought about it. And so you ask, why do I push the concept of central sensitivity syndrome? So you've got to tell doctors that these conditions do not occur in isolation, and that you're likely to have other things going on. And if you blame it all on the one lump that you've started out with, you're either going to mistreat the patient, like recommending post-exercise when the patient has coexisting ME, or missing out on diagnoses of interstitial cystitis or a whole bunch of other things. So I think the more that doctors know that these often have cousins that coexist, I think it expands our ability to focus treatment in areas that would otherwise be neglected.
And I'm going to add that I think one of the most important public health campaigns that is needed is explaining the concept of post-exertional malaise, because that is every message we get out of the public message is exercise is good, you should be exercising more. And that message needs to be nuanced so strongly that there are some people for which this is not the best way to go. And if public health would please take that on, it would be great.
So then going back to the Institute of Medicine reports criteria, which currently focuses on post-exertional malaise. It's at its core, it's like what its defining feature is, right? So if we were to expand that, what would the point be? If the concern is, and I understand it's a legitimate one, that there are patients who have FM who also have undiagnosed ME, that if all patients were screened for post-exertional malaise, as this was a question that was just automatically asked of anyone who had any kind of fatiguing pain type issue, and you ask them, do you have post-exertional malaise, then that would screen it out, because the danger that I think that you rightly identify is that patients will be recommended to do exercise and to push themselves through, and that's a danger only to people with ME. To the rest of the population, exercise is fabulous, but to ME, it's not. And that being said, in terms of the central sensitization syndrome, we have these different ways now of classifying these illnesses, because we don't really know what to do with these people. One is we've got the environmental illnesses, we've got complex chronic diseases, and now, Rick, you want to add central sensitization syndrome. If the concern there is that doctors being made aware that there is a constellation of illnesses, wouldn't it be better to use a term that doesn't come with it? And my concern is with the CSS is that people think that, all right, well, we can desensitize them through meditation and through other things. In many ways, CSS is seen as a bunch of somatic issues. And because it has that history, wouldn't it be best to stay away from that and use another term like complex chronic illness, which you already have as at the clinic?
Here, I second that. Here.
Okay, just because of timing today, and we're running about 15 minutes behind, and Dr. Copes is interested in our next workshop. We have 1, 2, there was a second.
I just have to ask them, I just want to have a chance to respond, which might not be better.
Okay, I just have to manage the time. So I had one person here, and there was someone else, and you were the second person. So let's get these 2 people who have their hands up, and
Hi. I just wanted to make a point that my understanding is that sort of graded exercise therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy is something that sort of stemmed from trials that were done in the UK. And in fact, they were case trials, and they were debunked in 2016 roughly because of the harm that those 2 methods caused to patients. So I think that's just very important to note. And I think that's another point I just want to make. This a study that was shown to be flawed after the fact.
Thank you.
I think I'm agreeing with you. I don't know who you are.
Elizabeth.
Oh, right. So I'm going to talk tomorrow on neuroplasticity. Central sensitization means that the brain is causing the symptoms.
Oh, disagreement.
We'll talk after.
So I've been living in that sandbox every day of my life for the last 4 to 5 years, extensively learning about it. And I'm going to share some of those ideas tomorrow. But what I've learned using those strategies with my patients is that although you can, I'll say the term very, very broadly, you can use brain strategies to decrease pain perception, those people become more fatigued the more they use those strategies. So it suggests that maybe there are some aspects of ME/CFS that are not primarily central.
thank you. And you get the last word. Actually, Margaret with the last word.
So that's the point I was trying to make in my talk earlier today, is that the term central sensitivity syndromes is an umbrella term saying that these belong to a family. When we have a name for something, we can get that concept across. Language is really important. If we don't have a name, it's really hard to get the concept across. I have not come across any physician who I brought this concept to who thought that the process was desensitization. They accept it as just an umbrella term. In terms of it being brain, the term may not be the best term, but central sensitization does not necessarily mean brain-based. It includes everything from peripheral sensitization to neuroendocrine stuff, inflammatory, and so it doesn't exclude all of these other epigenetic, all of those other factors. It's just used as an umbrella term. Probably not the best term, but it's the one that we have right now that's in the literature.
Well, we've certainly struck a chord because I've now got multiple hands up.
Well, I'm going to take the last word, and then we're going to go for coffee. I'm just going to point to the 2 ladies in the back row and say one of the slides I presented today was looking at the issue of comorbidities. The 2 ladies in the back row are from CIHR. They're very nice people. We were talking about different themes that could be studied. And one of the themes is comorbidities, which gets into the concept of families of illnesses. And I think what's coming out of this conversation is that not only we need to understand it, there is no doubt there, but we need to understand how it fits in the larger picture. And that is nice for scientific purposes, but it also helps patients. Now, where is coffee, Margaret?
Talking, Margaret?
Yes.
No, where is coffee?
Where's coffee? Other Margaret.
Yeah.
Comma. Where is coffee? Comma, Margaret? Is that what you mean?
I was told that coffee was available at 3:15. However,
It will be cold now.
it's now 3:30, and this is a decision that I'll defer to Margaret, but it involves Dr. Coe.
Apparently they just put the coffee out.
Sorry?
They just put the coffee out.
Coffee's just out, it's hot. Okay, hold that thought for a sec. We're about 15 minutes behind, and we were tight to get the workshop done on care pathways. Dr. Copes is highly interested in listening to the work you're going to do on that. So, if everybody could run and get coffee, and if you can't run, delegate it to someone who can run on your behalf. Could you be back here in 5 minutes? Can we do that, class? All right. And I would like to
Really hit home to me was the inflammatory arthritis model of care. And the inflammatory arthritis model of care, I mean, I read up on it, I've forgotten all my details, but they put together, 100 different groups of people, paid for with big funding. CIHR did some and other people did. And they sat down and discussed what are the principles of good care. And they came up with this pathway. You start with the patient who is knowledgeable enough to know that something is going on and goes in to see the primary care practitioner. And the primary care practitioner looks at the person and knows enough to think that this is a possible case of inflammatory arthritis. So they are put into a hub, and if it's non-inflammatory, they go see an orthopedic surgeon. If it's inflammatory, they go see the rheumatologist. So inherent in this model, it is a specialty looking after inflammatory arthritis. And I think they say in the book that you should be seeing this person within, I forget, 2 months, 3 months, 6 weeks or something, but they have timelines in to get it. After that, it's shared care, and they say chronic disease management, shared decision-making, comprehensive education, rehabilitation services, and so on. And the patient has the self-management, and there's oversight of the system. But you look at ME, and what is the model of care? The patient goes to the primary care physician and then drops out of the system, or the patient goes to the primary care practitioner and is sent off to specialists, whether it's a sleep specialist or a psychiatrist or whatever, and doesn't get a whole holistic picture of things. So the question that I ask myself is, in place of rheumatology, is there a specialty, should we be creating a specialty to take on ME care? And if we create a specialist, would it be only ME or would it be other things as well? Coming out of Ontario, it could be fibro and MCS. But wouldn't it be nice if the patient knew something was going on, went into the primary care physician, explained or tried to explain what's going on, because it can be very hard in those early days. The primary care practitioner says, I think there's something, and you get sent off to a specialist within a very short period of time. But then you also have the question, how long do you stay with a specialist? I know that in Ontario you only get 2 other visits. In BC it's about a year and then you're discharged from the program. I mean, people want long-term care, but I think I'm speaking for BC when I say the quandary is that if you don't get people out of the program, then you don't have a place to put new people in. So we have a transitional problem while we're trying to catch up with all the backlog of patients and so on. So that is an example of a model of care. Just another example is the CCDP pathway. I just copied it off one of your slides. This is when you actually get referred, you get referred from a family doctor, you get an introduction to the program, you get an intake call with a nurse, you get a questionnaire, you get an appointment with a team, and then you get the appointment with the doctor, there's follow-up group services, and you're returned to the community. So that's the path they follow. But what we would like to do is split up into groups and talk about, what would be possibly a mature pathway and what could be a pathway while you are, while we're in this transition period with this huge backlog and not trained people. So those are very difficult questions. And I'll ask Dr. Copes if he has any more questions that he would like addressed in the
I think basically any input on what's missing with respect to defining those unmet needs and what folks here in the room see as potential systems and models of care that could be put in place that would meet those needs. I think that's really, really valuable input. That could be quite helpful. And I had a little chat during the break with one of the folks from CIHR about some of the things that we're trying to look at that may help integrate research, clinical care at different levels, and put together a package that we think would really, really move things forward on a number of fronts. But I think the experiences here in the room are even better able to come up with some suggestions, perhaps, from folks in the task force. Please have at it. And I know the dean will be here till the end, right, the dean? And I will have to leave shortly after the look forward to getting you. Yes?
I'm the city of Houston. I'm the founder and CEO of the national. The reason I'm at this meeting is
Yeah, Lydia.
you need a microphone.
I want this to be a public conversation.
Sorry. Okay, I'm the diagnosis, and what I'm referring to is that 9 years ago, my husband died of cancer. What was interesting about that was a very rapid growing cancer that we was around for about 2 years because of the treatment they got. What was good about that was when we went to the doctor's office, within 24 hours, he was referred to the general hospital. He got a special doctor to see him specifically for this cancer. He got a supervisor to come over to help him. All the way down the line, there were people there to help him along, to know what to do. Now, how beautiful it would be if the same thing could happen to people with ME, FM, MCS. It is done for all the other illnesses. Lyme disease, they're just starting to see it. Now it's our turn.
Yeah, that certainly is the
So
goal.
that's the model.
And what we're looking at
Yeah.
is what would that model look like, what would it include? So that's absolutely the goal. And what we're looking for is in the small groups that you'll be in now, is that it? And to come up with some more specific suggestions as to, and your experience with your husband, I'm very sorry about it. That's the kind of, yeah.
We walked in there like we were lost, which would be with any illness, and they just guided us along.
So how can we replicate or create that awesomeness for folks with the condition? And I appreciate that the experience isn't going to be awesome no matter what, but it's the system of care that awesomeness.
Can we start from that perspective of the good approach that the Cancer Society has done, whether it be breast cancer or they seem to just scoop you up and take you through a process with help along the way, and rather than reinventing the wheel.
So let me just come back to sort of what we want to accomplish and how each of your group tackles it. Believe me, individuality or whatever innovativeness always pays off. Right. I'm going to maybe only give you 25 minutes as opposed to the 30. To try and come to some kind of consensus in your individual groups as to what you could, play back to Dr. Coates and say, This would be the best way to go forward.
And it will be written or captured.
It's all being captured on paper, it's being captured by video. Okay, on your pathways. Let me just go through the methodology quickly, and then I'll come back to the question specifically. In any good group, and I'm going to put you in groups, assign someone as sort of the leader just to keep your group, moving ahead. If you've got 25 minutes, okay, how many questions are you trying to answer? Allocate your time. And who's going to take notes for your group, and who's going to present, okay? Just sort of basics. I'm going to run around and hand out flip charts to each group and pens. So the note taker, you've got a flip chart, you've got some pens. Okay, Margaret came with 4 questions, and you've got them in your handout there. Those were the original questions. But what I just heard Margaret really summarizes the key questions, and then Dr. Cope's added to it is, would all of you just make a note of this on your handout? What would a mature care pathway look like? And that's Lydia's question, or not question, suggestion, and that's what the lady in the back in the white has just said. So if you were to suggest back to the task force, this is how we think, here's the model that our group thinks is best, okay? The second question Margaret said is, okay, until we get there, is there anything you could suggest as a short-term, really good approach? Then Dr. Cope said, so just for the moment, forget special groups, forget who needs to be involved in the discussions. If we had all the time in the world, I think we'd answer those. But Dr. Cope said, what is missing to define the unmet needs? What systems are needed? So I think they're talking the same language, because they want to get at what's the care pathway that you would recommend, and then what's a short-term way to get there. You okay with the ask?
And the what's missing. That's really important.
And what's missing? Okay?
Everything, that's easy.
Well, the what's
Can you
missing.
define everything in a little more?
Yeah, but Dr. Coates, so I can clarify with you. The what's missing in a way was the feedback of the report, the feedback of all the questions today. You don't mean that right now.
No, I mean in the care that is